This is the Chamberlink, connecting community, creating impact with Tyler Fischbach.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. It's another beautiful day in Fargo, and I'm excited for this episode. I think we're really keeping up the momentum. If you tuned in last week, we were with Charlie Johnson and Kent Kolstead talking about the future convention center at Fargo. And today, in my opinion, is just as, if not more exciting. And we're going to be talking about Fargo Hector International Airport and the major expansion going on up there. And this is a very popular topic. There are a lot of people who are very interested in this. It touches a lot of people, of course, in our business community, but even people outside of our community. It has a lot of reach and it impacts a lot of folks. And so I think there's going to be a lot of interest for people to learn more about what's going on behind the scenes. And last night I was doing a little bit of research, Sean, on your website, and there were some interesting history tidbits that these won't necessarily add a whole lot to the conversation, but I thought they were interesting, so I'm just going to go ahead and share them because I learned a lot, and a lot about how long the airport has been around. And so the history of the Hector International Airport dates back, nearly 100 years ago at this point, in 1927, when Martin Hector leased a quarter section of land to the city of Fargo for $1 per year, which seems pretty generous. That's a pretty good price. And so this would eventually be home to Fargo's municipal airport. After that initial lease period in spring of 1931, Martin Hector gifted the land outright to the facility. And a few months after that, there was a major dedication ceremony. And I was reading back, too, there were over 5,000 attendees and residents who showed up for that, which is pretty impressive. And that's when the airport was named Hector Field. And for more context, just a couple of months prior to that, you can fact check me, but I think that's when Northwest Airlines, which was founded at now where the MSP International Airport is, that's when they started their passenger service to Fargo, which I thought was kind of cool because in my head, that is such a long time ago. And so it was just very interesting to me to read that. And then fast forwarding, in 1982, Hector Field became Hector International Airport, and U.S. Customs subsequently had an office there, or moved their office to the field. And then the present terminal was built in 1986, and I think it did move a little bit, locations on the field. And so where it sits now, that was built in 1986. And fast forward again, in 2008, the airport did complete a passenger terminal expansion, and that consisted of, it was upgrades, a refresh. There was a fifth gate added, a third baggage claim, and other upgrades. So that was a big deal. And so here we sit today in 2025, nearly 100 years of history, and of course our community has grown, expanded. Our economy is growing, the demand is growing, and I think last year it was a record-breaking year for passengers too. So the airport is growing, and so now's the time to obviously have this expansion project, but it's really time to discuss it too. And so I'm going to introduce our two guests quickly, then I'm going to kick it to Sean for a little background. But today we have with us Sean Doberstein, who is the Executive Director at Fargo Airport Authority. And real quick, Sean, how long have you been leading the Fargo Airport Authority?
I was appointed the interim director in December of 96 and then the executive director in January of 1997.
Okay, great. So you're a well-established leader here. I did not know that, so thank you for sharing. And we also have Dr. Dean Bresciani, who is a Fargo Airport Authority board member. And Dr. Bresciani is also a distinguished professor, at NDSU and former president of NDSU. So thank you for being here. And as Dr. Bresciani and I were catching up, I appreciate you for saying yes to these things. I know in the past you said yes to, for example, when Steve Scheel was the legacy leader and I didn't give you much info, I was like, hey, Dr. Bresciani, can you show up and do this video? So I appreciate your willingness to be a part of these conversations. So Sean, what I would like to do, can you maybe give a little background on how this current expansion, how did this start in discussions? How did this come to be, or when did you guys start formulating thoughts about, okay, we got to start thinking about expanding this place? I'm really curious about how far back that discussion started and why.
Been on the capital improvement plan for a number of years, but formal discussions would have started in probably mid-2018, leading up to the pandemic, when we were in the process of working with the Federal Aviation Administration on a terminal area study, which is required by the FAA before you can move forward and request federal funding for a project. And things were moving forward once COVID hit in early 2020. Then the FAA put all of those studies across the country on hold until we rebounded from that, came out of the pandemic. And then in approximately early 2022, we restarted that terminal area forecast, and that was finished then probably in 2023. And that document is used to justify the square footage of all of the areas within the terminal based on our passenger growth projections, which the FAA provides as part of the terminal area forecast. And the FAA's data says that we'll grow at a rate of a little over 2% per year in terms of employments from that. And so that was the basis of it once that was approved. And then once the FAA approved that, then the board undertook requests for proposals for engineering and architecture contracts and so forth to get an architect under contract along with engineers then to start the design of the terminal. And as part of that, there was lots of community meetings and feedback that we gained from the Chamber was instrumental in that, along with the EDC and the Convention and Visitors Bureau, to really get input from the public in terms of what their vision was for the expansion. The colors, the space, the size, all of that stuff was taken into consideration. And what you see today is the results of those inputs from our traveling public.
That's very cool. And we'll definitely touch more on community input, because I know we've had meetings about this recently and survey results, et cetera. But I know people are probably itching for us to at least lay it out there, and then we'll get into details. Can you give a high-level overview of what people can expect? What are some of the key elements in this project that passengers can expect to see in X amount of years when this is completed? And I'm curious, too, because I don't know every aspect of this whole project. So if you could lay that out a little bit.
Yeah, so the expanded area out to the east towards the control tower will be 81,000 square feet, and we're adding 4 gates to that. We currently have 5 boarding bridges, and we'll be going to 9 upon completion of the project. And what you'll see once you get beyond the checkpoint is really going to be transformational. Where the restaurant is now will become the checkpoint. And on July 14th, the current restaurant, when you go up the escalator and take a right, that'll all be sheetrocked off, and they'll be starting construction there. So our restaurant will be closed down. Mm-hmm. And we're making alternate plans for some minimal food and beverage services for the next few months. The other thing that you'll see is where the checkpoint is now, that will become the restaurant. It's what we call the Salty Bison, through Skydine, which is our food and beverage operator out of Sioux Falls. They operate at some other airports around the country as well. And then once you get through into the gate area as well, there'll be a larger gift shop. Right now that's pre-security. That'll be post-security. The food that's offered pre-security now will be offered post-security, a larger bar and restaurant area, a snack bar, more grab-and-go type items that you see. And what's really going to be interesting is when you stand at gate 1, you can look all the way down to gate 9. So there'll be one total tunnel that will go through there, larger seating areas in the departure lounge. As you wait for your aircraft, there'll be larger seating areas. There'll be a service animal relief area if you're in that. There'll be a mother's nurturing room. There'll be a sensory room. There'll be a children's play area, and still working on, but all types of art and artifacts, if you will, that we're working with North Dakota State University and Dr. Michael Strand to set up some things so that once you get here, you have a feeling of place, that here's what Fargo-Moorhead, West Fargo is all about, so that you know where you're at and have some type of an impression once you arrive here and of course depart. So all types of different things that are happening. Our baggage claim is updated. They just finished today the first of the 3 baggage claims as they're going through, and you'll see the new color scheme. Everything that's in brown tones now will be white. And you can see this all on fargoairport.com. If you go under terminal expansion, you can do the fly-through video that's there and see what everything's going to look like.
Oh, that's very cool. Actually, what I might do is link right to that, so when people watch this episode after the fact, they can go explore that a little bit. Okay, after we take this break, I'm going to talk to Dr. Bresciani a little bit just about how he fits into this and some of his perspectives, and so we'll get into that right after this break. Welcome back to the show, and right now we're going to chat a little bit with Dr. Bresciani, and I have maybe a 2-part question, and not meaning to stump anybody, so Sean, you can jump in if it makes sense for you to answer too, but I'm curious how, and this is a genuine question, just the governance structure. How do you guys operate as the authority? I'm just curious, like how people are appointed, how decisions are made. And then second part question, I'm really curious about some of your main focuses as a board. What are some things you're focusing on, I guess in general, but even with this expansion too, if you have those huge priorities?
Sure. The board members are vetted and recommended by the mayor to the city commission, who ultimately confirms them. After that, largely an independent organization. And that's important, I believe, because you're bringing in representatives of different segments and interests of the community with different expertise. And if you look at the board members, you can see they're quite varied. And that's the strength of it, is you're having those perspectives and the diversity. This isn't a rubber stamp organization. At the same time, we're very fortunate to have one of the most expert and well-respected executive directors of the airport in Sean Doberstein. So our role, in my mind, is not to help Sean run the airport. It's to oversee its policies, its direction, and envisioning of its future. And right now, what we're going through is why that diversity of the board members is particularly important, because we have people representing every aspect of our community, ostensibly, and making sure that those voices, the voices of our business leaders, voices of our 5 colleges and universities. As a matter of fact, I'd include UND in that largely. 6 colleges and universities that are served by Hector International. There's just the pedestrian flyer, all the people that use and need to depend on the airport, having their voices be at the table when we're talking about those future directions and envisioning of the future for the airport.
That's great. And I'm curious, too, how do you balance, and I don't know how difficult it might be. I imagine it might be difficult. So, for example, we had that roundtable meeting at the chamber. I think that was just this week. It's been a long week already. It's only Tuesday.
June 30th.
Maybe
But there's a lot of input that we gather from the community, and I have the survey results. We'll probably hit on a couple of things, but how do you balance, all of the desires that the community has and lots of wishes and opinions with the realities of what can be done? And that might lead us to how this is all funded, but how do you balance that, like with the wishes and the what's reality? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the conversation, the board members would all want to agree with those wishes, and most probably do. There are some things the airport can't do that are actually operational concerns of the airlines themselves, and a meeting with business leaders like that, I think, was extremely helpful for them understanding what the airport can do and what it doesn't have control over, but ways to work around those aspects that we don't control. That doesn't mean we can't do anything about them. And our business leaders and common flyers can be a big part of addressing those sorts of issues. We're very fortunate to have airlines that desire to serve us well and to do their job well, and they want to know if they're not doing a good job. So it's a balance of an educated representative body through the Municipal Airport Authority, but also educating our flyers on the role they can have and the experience they have when they fly through Hector.
Well, I know so when the chamber sent out our survey, and I know that wasn't the only survey that went out, but when we sent ours to business leaders, we got it was just around 400, maybe slightly over 400 respondents. And in my mind, having dealt with surveys a lot in the past, I was pretty thrilled with that response rate. And one of the highest things that people desired were more direct flights, obviously, which could lead us into, how does that come to be? How does that get decided? Is it the airlines? Is it you? I'm really curious because you guys just had that announcement about the direct to Atlanta coming in December. And how does that come to fruition? I have no idea who makes that decision, or if you hope that Delta sees what they want to see, or I don't know. Can you unpack that a little bit with how that works?
Yeah, it's called air service development. So you create relationships with those airlines that are incumbent and other carriers that are looking to enter our market or are monitoring for the right time to enter the market. It comes down to profit and loss. So if an airline is looking at how profitable a route from Fargo to Minneapolis could be, or from Fargo to Dallas, or wherever it is, it's all about profitability and what their margin is, because they're required to give their shareholders a return, on their investment.
Yep.
And there's a lot of opportunities in Fargo where an airline can come in and make money. It's just that there could be other market pairs from a hub airport to a spoke city that makes more. Fargo is geographically challenged as opposed to some other airports that are in the central part of the country. Sioux Falls has, I would say, a 500-mile advantage over Fargo on a round-trip basis, as they're closer to some of the other hubs. And it costs a lot of money to operate an aircraft for that time period from point A to point B. A general rule of thumb is that if you have 30 people from your community or more going to a particular market, that would give an airline incentive to come in and start nonstop service to that particular community. And the same as how many people are coming from that community into to Fargo. So 30 is kind of a typical rule. Delta kind of broke that mold because we only had 17 people a day that would just fly from Fargo to Atlanta, and 17 a day that come from Atlanta to Fargo. but they think they can stimulate the market by eliminating double connects over Minneapolis. A lot of times you fly Fargo, Minneapolis to Atlanta, and then to your destination. Atlanta opens up hundreds of different nonstop opportunities for us, both domestic and international. So I meet regularly with network planners and revenue management people, pitching Fargo for various new destinations or upgrading current aircraft from 50-seat to mainline or to larger regional jets, and just keeping them informed of what's going on in the community. And granted, these network planners really know a lot about our community when we do meet with them, whether it's in person or virtual or just by telephone. They know a lot what's happening. What they want to know is what's happened in the last 48 to 72 hours that hasn't made the paper. Has there been an acquisition of a company in Fargo by another company where it's going to stimulate traffic to another community? Or did a company in Fargo purchase, another company someplace else in the country that's going to stimulate traffic? They want to be able to capture that and be the first one to go there and offer, their service to that business person. So there's lots that goes into it, but really it comes down to profitability.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Business is business, right? That's curious. That's interesting to me how much of a pulse they do have in our community. That's good that they do, but that's very interesting to learn. You brought up Sioux Falls, and what is this called? Do you call this your catchment area? Is that the right term? So what is that like with, I suppose, competing with other airports? Because I know it's probably something that goes through a passenger's mind. Of course, they're playing the pricing game. It's like, do I drive to MSP? Do I drive to Sioux Falls? Right. So what is that overlap like? Is there a large segment that we're trying to compete for that we need to, do our best to get them flying out of Fargo instead of...
Yeah, mileage-wise, you can look at the catchment area. We're just south of Grand Forks. We don't want to include Grand Forks in our catchment area, even though we have a lot of people from that area and north that do support us. And what I'm getting to is a leakage study. We lose about 30% of our people in the catchment area to Minneapolis. And so north, we're just south of Grand Forks. To the east, southeast, we're about Alexandria. And to the west, we're about maybe Valley City, almost Jamestown area. And to the south, we're just north of Watertown. It's a large catchment area, and we receive that data through an airline clearinghouse, whereby the airlines report 10% of the tickets that they sell for each market, and then you extrapolate that into how many people are flying to this destination or that destination, and what zip code are they from, and did they originate in Fargo, did they originate in Grand Forks or Sioux Falls or Watertown or Brainerd, wherever it is. We get all of that data and then look at what we're leaking from what we think is our catchment area.
And when Sean talks about that leakage, I think the primary place is Minneapolis. Yeah. But I suspect strongly that when people choose MSP, they're looking at the plane ticket price, and they're not including. I often hear 3.5 hours. I've never gotten to Minneapolis in 3.5 hours to the airport. So at least a 4-hour or 8-hour round trip, parking, accommodations there. It's tough to make it math out other than at times the tickets being less. And so that's part of our challenge as far as the Municipal Airport Authority. So I think we need to help educate our flyers that Hector generally is going to be the best choice economically and by far on a convenience level.
Mm-hmm. And, well, we'll see if we can sneak this in, because I'm assuming, though, Fargo has to deal with selling out planes or availability a lot quicker, obviously, than MSP, which has to do with it. But I want to keep on this, but we have to get to news really quick, so we're going to take a couple-minute break, and we'll be right back and keep talking about this airport expansion. Welcome back to the show. When we were off air during that last break, we were chatting, and Sean brought up some pretty interesting stats. Can you explain to the listeners what you were mentioning about how Fargo's available seats kind of fluctuate and maybe how that compares to other markets? I think that's kind of fascinating, and the impacts of that.
We average just under 2,000 seats per day in the market, and then we have peaks and valleys every day. It depends on when Allegiant and Frontier are operating. Some days they operate together. Those are both considered ultra low cost carriers, and they don't operate every day of the week. So we have our peaks and valleys, but like I say, we're averaging just under 2,000 seats a day.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So this is a slight change in discussion, but it's something that I think is pretty important to, well, at least even through the Chamber's lens. We were here last week talking about the convention center, and you think about projects like that and our work to attract people here and retain them here. And of course, the EDC is a part of that too. There are so many players working in that space. And I'm curious, as we're in competition with all these other metros for whether it's amenities, jobs, quality of life. How do you two see the airport fitting into that as a staple of, this could be a reason why somebody chooses to, of course, visit here, but even say that, yeah, this place has got it. This has got everything I want. And I'm just curious from your perspective how you see this project as ratcheting up our metro in competition, and I don't know, just your thoughts on the whole thing.
Well, for our business community and for our colleges and universities, as I mentioned before, particularly for NDSU and UND, the ability to get personnel in and out quickly, conveniently, and that's where the convenience of Hector versus driving somewhere hours away comes in, is absolutely vital. And I think we've historically been very fortunate that our city leaders have recognized that as well, with a very strong base of public municipal financial support. That's not unique to Fargo, though. As a matter of fact, 3 of these cities in North Dakota have twice as large of a financial commitment to their airports as we enjoy in Fargo. But that's illustrative of just how vital that is to the economic drivers in our region. And I think our business leaders, and I can assure you, NDSU and UND would say that Hector's expansion is critical to maintaining that vitality of drawing people, them knowing that they're not going to a place at the edge of the earth, that within a very short period of time, with almost no commuting involved, you can be at an international airport and serviced across the country.
Yeah, you brought up 2 very interesting things there. The edge of the earth comment. I mean, I see where you're coming from, because I've been wowed before going to what I thought was a small community, not Fargo, but I just was visiting somewhere. And I have been wowed before, whether it was art downtown or amenities downtown. And that can really flip your perspective when you only get a small taste of a place. It can really shift your thought process about a place. But you mentioned funding, and that makes me so curious. How is this project funded? I'm guessing it's a good mix of, is there federal, local, state? Is it the whole gamut? Can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah, those 3. So terminal projects are unique in that they don't qualify for the full federal funding that other projects like runways and taxiways do. Typically, a federally eligible project will receive 90% federal funding, and then the 10% local share, which is funded by the airport, and then we split that local share with the state as well. So 90% federal, 2.5% local, 2.5% from the state. That's typical. Terminal project, we worked with the architect and the engineers and the FAA, and they came up with the project that's underway right now is only eligible for 76.5% federal funding. It doesn't mean that the federal government will come up with their entire 76.5% share, which they're not. We're working with the delegation to hopefully receive more federal grants that are competitive, called discretionary grants. But then we also were very fortunate that the North Dakota legislature granted us $45 million in what they call a one-time generational project request. And we worked with Grand Forks and Dickinson through the Airport Association of North Dakota, requesting $120 million, $60 million for Fargo, $30 million for Grand Forks, and $30 million for Dickinson. And we ended up with $45 million for us, and then Grand Forks and Dickinson were slightly less than that. And then locally, the Airport Authority, some years ago, Dean and his predecessors deliberately started to build up a reserves for this project. So that's the 3-legged stool is local, federal, and of course state funds.
Yesterday, our VP of Public Policy, Cale Dunwoody, was giving our staff an overview of how both legislative sessions went in both states. And when we were on the North Dakota topic, he did bring up that $45 million. And of course, the chamber is happy to see funding come in. And so that's interesting you say that, because Cale that was one of his big bullet points, was that. And that leads me to a question. When I was doing a little research last night, I came across an article that you did. I can't remember for who, but can you explain a little bit how, outside of this project, how is the airport funded? I almost remember a line saying that this is a very self-sustainable airport. Can you kind of explain what that means?
Yeah, contrary to the article this morning, the airport is 100% self-sufficient. The tax money that we do receive from the taxpayers, we're very grateful for, goes to infrastructure. That was the agreement the Airport Authority made with the city back in 1969 when the Airport Authority was created. Is any tax money that would come from the property taxpayers in Fargo would go for infrastructure. The operations and maintenance, the day-to-day operations are are funded 100% through the revenues that we generate from parking, car rental, landing fees, terminal rent, hangar, fuel flowage fees. There's a whole host of different revenues that come in to self-sustain the airport from that. So, but the taxpayers obviously have an investment in the airport. It's the taxpayer money that we show the federal government and the state government as what the local buy-in is to support the local airport. And that results in grants from the state and federal government because we can demonstrate that the taxpayers are vested in their airport.
And those sources of support are incredibly tightly tied. Everybody's looking to see what everybody else is doing. And particularly for the federal sources, they're going to want to see a state and city investment in the airport. And anything but that provides them an excuse in a highly competitive resource market for them to back off of federal support. So each of these is tied to the other one.
Yeah, that's very. I'm always so intrigued by how funding works, and I know, like Kale on our team, for example, he's so in tune with public policy. He'll probably laugh at me that I'm infatuated with it because it's everyday business to him. But it's cool to see how all of that works and comes together. And I think as a layman, I appreciate you guys breaking that down for me.
The fact of the matter is that without the levy support from the taxpayers of Fargo, which is a pass-through from the city of Fargo to the airport authority, these projects would cost more because we would have to either issue additional revenue bonds and or maybe borrow a line of credit or some other form of financing to fund these projects. Because the engineering and architectural fees that we do for projects that we're going to do in the future, 100% of that has to be funded by the airport locally. And without the levy support, it just becomes more difficult, and the projects would cost more.
Very interesting.
And again, I have to point out that all of the airports in North Dakota are provided support by their local community. We're at the low end of the scale, actually, with the oddish exception of Bismarck, which is an anomalous situation. We're at the low end, and as I mentioned, 3 of the airports receive twice as much local support, and those are Jamestown, Dickinson, and Williston, cities with a dramatically smaller airport operation, whereas Hector is providing the vast majority of airport services for the entire state in terms of frequency of flyers. So that support is absolutely critical. Without it, you'd start seeing an erosion, I suspect, of state and federal funding that could bring things to a painful conclusion.
Yeah. So there's 89 publicly funded airports in the state of North Dakota. 84 of those are governed by airport authorities. So in the North Dakota Century Code, 2-06 is the Airport Authorities Act. So we're set up as an independent political subdivision, just like a park district, a school district, a city, or a county. The difference is that our members are appointed versus being elected. So about 3 or 4 legislative sessions ago, the legislature changed the Airport Authorities Act, whereby what the airport authorities would do is certify a mill levy to their creating entity, and they shall levy that. And up to 4 mills is what the state statute has. Then it was changed to may. So each year we have to go before our creating entity, the Fargo City Commission, to request that they levy the amount that we need to for our infrastructure projects. Where prior to that, it was mandatory. Now it's shall. So it's a little different.
Yeah. Well, thank you for unpacking that. I had no idea. I had no idea there were that many airports in the state either. That's kind of surprising to me. Well, we have a few minutes before our final break here, so we'll jump into this. We might have to come back to it, but I'm curious to circle back to, because I wasn't able to sit in on that roundtable meeting that you guys had last week. I can't remember when exactly it was, but was there anything that boiled to the surface that stood out besides maybe direct flights that the business community is pretty keen on, or that were topics of discussion?
The direct flights. I think the biggest comments were related to food and beverage. And we are addressing that in the new design, whereby once you get through the checkpoint, you'll be able to have a sit-down, full-service restaurant, where now it's prior to the checkpoint. So that was one of the big takeaways. Maybe a little different variety of food. I mean, Skydive does a great job with the food offerings that we do have. It's got like truck stop food. It's really good. But, suggestions for pizzas or other types of things. And I think we'll work with our food and beverage provider to address some of those needs. Interesting.
So there are still elements of this that are up in the air. I don't know if that's the right term to use, but things that are adjustable, I suppose. Like, I'm just interested how that works. Like, you can change things, shuffle things, get feedback from folks.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep, they can develop their menu based on, popular feedback,
Yep.
and they always take feedback. So whether it's in parking or concessions, car rental, all of that, the airport in general, we're constantly taking customer feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a substantial change too, as Sean highlighted, is the straight shot arrangement of the gates, because that also means people at one end are going to be able to see the amenities at the other end versus wondering, or a non-frequent flyer. If you make a right turn after TSA, you have no idea what's over to the left side now. In the future, you'll be able to see everything that's available to you.
Well, after this last break here, I do want to jump back into parking, and I'm just out of curiosity what the status is, what's next, and what the master plans are, because I know everybody is interested in parking. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. We're in our last segment for today, and we were just chatting about parking. I know how near and dear that is to everybody's heart. And so, Sean, could you give us an update of what the current status is out there for parking and what to expect? I've heard, and you can fact check me on this, that there's also going to have to be a little bit of a shuffle with where people get dropped off in the near future with another aspect of that. So if you want to lean into that a little bit, I'm curious.
So the parking structure that's been under construction for a little less than a year now will open in August. So we're less than a month away from opening this new structure. It's 4 stories. It'll hold 1,000 vehicles. And once that opens, we will be shutting down all of the traffic lanes in front of the passenger terminal and reopen them sometime in February of 2026. And the reason for that is so the contractor can have unabated access to the front of the terminal to construct the skyway that will connect the parking structure to the terminal building. And that skyway, it's about a $5 to $6 million project from that, but it will connect the parking ramp to the terminal. It's going to be one of the most disruptive parts of the project because, one, shutting down traffic. So all drop-offs and pickups will take place on the first floor of the parking ramp once that opens, and then, like I say, we'll reopen it. The skyway should be finished about this time next year.
I see.
And that's actually a good thing in my mind. And people might question me about that. But the average North Dakotan, I think they see this monstrous parking deck. It would be intimidating to go into it if you didn't know it and feel comfortable with it. This is going to create a situation where our flyers will have to go into it. I think once they go in, they're going to be amazed. It is cutting-edge technology, extremely convenient. The sizing both of roof lines and the width of parking spaces. I specifically wanted to make sure that our ag friends were happy when they pull in with a 3/4 ton pickup that they can actually open the doors. And so getting people inside of the deck, I think, is going to actually be an accidental coup.
Yeah, right. What is that called? Like shock exposure? Or what is that? When you like, throw somebody in a pool, teach them how to swim? But I get that. Gosh, I've been in airports before, and I don't even have a big vehicle, and you can't even get out your doors, and you come back and you have door dings left, right, and center on your vehicle. So that's good to know. Yeah. And okay, so all said and done, there's a lot going on with refresh, updating inside, skyway, parking. When is this collectively going to be done? Is it that simple to say it will be done at some point, or is it always going to be evolving, or what's that timeline?
The expanded area will open in January of 2026, so we're not too far away from the new expanded area opening. Okay. And like I said, there'll be a gift shop will be open. There'll be a small coffee kiosk bar that will be open. And then as they work on the existing terminal footprint that we're in right now, some of it is underway as we speak, all of that will be done first quarter of 2027.
Okay, so that's really not too far away. I mean, we were just chatting about how quick time goes. We're like, wow, the summer's almost gone. But I mean, that idea is so true. It's going to be a blink of an eye. Yep.
And the parking deck will be available in roughly a month, August.
Yep.
Yeah.
We plan on having cars parking in there when we're doing the ribbon cutting. Yeah. It is very near completion, and I think people are going to be very impressed by it. It's not a tight, dingy parking structure. It's a graciously spaced, using technology where you're able to tell how many spaces are on every floor, et cetera, get in and out very easily in an expedited manner. People are going to be impressed, and they're going to be happy with the facility.
That's very cool. Well, I'm excited, even personally. I'm excited to get in there and check it out.
Yep. You can book your parking online, fargoairport.com, and use the dynamic pricing and find some pretty good deals. So the parking structure was built on top of the existing short-term lot, which had like 238 spaces. So with the 1,000-space parking garage, we're going to net a little over 750 new spaces. The rate is set at $25 per day. The previous short-term rate was $22, and we hope people will take advantage of it.
Oh, very good. Well, so what do you think? What's next? You know, we chatted, or I gave a little tidbit of history, with the 2008 work that was done. Obviously, we're going through it right now. When you think about the future and the fact that this community is going to keep growing, demand is going to keep being there, the economy, people moving here, what's next for the airport? I mean, are you already thinking about that, or what, are you trying to just get through this?
Well,
first?
we're always working on our capital improvement plan because the FAA requires, a lot of planning for that, 3 to 5 years out, especially. And we'll be meeting in D.C. here in next week to give the FAA an update on our planned projects over the next 3 to 5 years, and then talk about current projects that we're competing for this discretionary grant dollars from. So there'll be some updates, but the big project coming up will be the extension of our east-west runway. It's probably about estimated around $150 million project. And what that will do is will accommodate larger aircraft because our primary runway right now will need to be reconstructed at some point. And without an alternate runway to operate, we basically would be closed down as that was be reconstructed. So it's very important for us to get their crosswind runway addressed.
Wow. And yeah, shutting down obviously would be terrible. And then that goes back to our funding discussion, why it's so important to have the funds to do things like this. I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that, but it's just so curious to me how expensive this is too. I never would have thought how much it does take to do this work at an international airport. So thank you for sharing all those dollar amounts with us. That's quite shocking. When we think about the business community, as we have a few minutes left, are there any challenges that you guys have on the airport authority or just in general that the business community can continue to step up? Of course, we love the fact that we had 400 people take the survey and are vested in this project. But I can only imagine that there is other engagement or things that we could all help with. I don't know, what might that be, or what are some challenges we could all help you work together on?
Well, I would say our city commissioners want to do their job well. We know that historically they have done it well in terms of their support for the airport. It's going to be very important for the business community to remind them just how vital Hector International has been, is, and increasingly is going to be in the future. If they don't hear that feedback, then it becomes a guessing game that we can't afford to lose.
We definitely always want to hear the feedback from the business community. A lot of the key leaders at the our large businesses that travel a lot are road warriors, if you will, whether it's Bobcat or John Deere or others, keep in contact. So we're aware of what their needs are, but if there's others out there in the community, don't hesitate to let us know.
And at that meeting with the business leaders, it's worth noting our colleges and universities were represented as well. I can't overstate how important Hector is to their success, their ability to get the best faculty, the best staff, the best researchers, and frankly, students as well from out of state, which are the lifeblood to the success of our colleges and universities.
Yeah, I think that's a key point. And I mean, that you can really extrapolate that idea to many industries and businesses and just growth in general here. It's insanely important that this is a successful airport that keeps growing. Yes.
And we're just a few months away from the North Dakota Aeronautics Commission releasing their economic impact update, all based on 2024 data. The last one they released was in 2015, and Fargo was just under $500 million in economic impact. And I know that we've grown substantially since then because of FedEx and UPS, their presence, the expansion of the military on the airport, both for the Air and Army National Guard. I think we'll see a really big number as far as the economic impact that Fargo provides to the rest of the state and the region.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. Well, gentlemen, we're in our last couple seconds here, so I'm going to give a couple quick updates, but thank you both very much for being here and unpacking that. You taught me a lot, and I know for a fact that other people learned a lot too, so I really appreciate that. And, kind of to the point of public policy, next week I'll be here with Representative Steve Swantek and Representative Jim Joy with Cale Dunwoody, and we're gonna probably bring up the airport at some point because that's going to be a part of our legislative recaps. So we're going to keep the momentum going on the show. So make sure you tune in next week too for a little recap from Cale about how things went and how the chamber has been involved. So thank you both very much, and we'll be here next week.